Hello to YouTube and Twitch. Hi, it's good to see y'all. It's good to see the YouTubey people. And also hi to Discord. I don't know why I still do this on Discord, but habit. Um, so this is the only reading that we will have this week. Thank you so much. Yeah, this is the only reading that we will have for this week because on Wednesday morning I leave for the Cape. Yeah, let's see how it goes. This is yeah. I don't know why this thing is not doing the whole full background thing. It just doesn't want to today. But yeah, I leave for Le Cape. Today's goal is back to normal. It is back to 90. That is the normal goal. So if you can, please hit up the gift goal. And yeah, Cape Town. It's good to see you, Taro. It is good to see you, Soy Pantera. Yeah, let's get into it. So I'm so sorry for starting late. Yeah, this week is going to be a crazy week. So yeah, let's get into it. We are reading The Architecture of Modern Empire by, it's interviews with Arundhati Roy. And last week when we stopped, we were talking about political writing. And she was saying that writing in English kind of opens up new audiences to people who are not... Hi, Cole. It's good to see you. Opens up the audience to people who would never have actually read the work. But it is a very small contingent of writers from places like India, because the publishing industry sees, okay, we have all of these stories, we don't need any more. So we're going to ignore, all of the other brown writers and writers of color because, we have our tokens. So she was discussing that as well. But she was also saying that she's old school when it comes to dealing with emails and stuff. She refuses to have a secretary and all of that. So now we get to The Cost of Living. This is a book that I received. Hi, Tevin. This is a book I received as a gift from a friend of mine, a dear, dear friend of mine. I'll share a screenshot of the latest message he sent me. It's just so beautiful. The Cost of Living is a book that kind of, it should change everybody's view on how people exist in the global south. And so, yeah, we fall into it there. Himanshu Thakkar is someone whom you admire. You mention him in the introduction to The Cost of Living. I happened to meet him and he told me, it's remarkable. The women are the leaders of the country, advancing the movements for social justice. Why is that? And she answers, I don't know, but it's absolutely correct. In India, the legacy of the freedom struggle has been a great respect for nonviolent resistance. The pros and cons of violent and nonviolent resistance can be debated. But I don't think there can be any doubt that violence resistance harms women physically and psychologically in deep and complex ways. And this is something that I say all the time. Yes, there is a space for violent resistance. But we cannot only rely on that. We have to rely on nonviolent resistance too, because the most marginalized in society will be harmed by violence. And that is why I am not an accelerationist. I don't think people in the West especially are ready for the cost of revolution, what it costs to actually have a revolution. Having said that, Indian society is still deeply disrespectful of women. The daily violence, injustice, and indignity heaped on women is hard to believe sometimes. And yeah, it's vile. But that is the reason that I am not an accelerationist, that I'm not revolution first, ask questions later. Because women are already seen as spoils of war. Rape and other forms of sexual violence is already seen as a norm in war. Trafficking children is seen as a byproduct of war. So how are we going to actually manage an entire revolution in one country, let alone hundreds, against the ruling classes, when we are not prepared for that? So this is a pretty long question. But this takes place against a backdrop of an institutionalized misogyny that is deeply culturally embedded. One example was a report in the Times of India a couple of days ago that there is a crisis in Haryana because there are not enough marriageable girls. Ugh. Why aren't there enough marriageable girls? Because of female feticide. The families have to buy brides for their sons from outside the state and community. It's interesting that the Times said that desperate boys are willing to marry girls from any caste. That's another one of these incredible contradictions. Indeed. So she answers, that is India. We don't even blink when someone brings up a contradiction. What is interesting is that a lot of women who are involved in resistance movements and who are activists are also redefining what modern means. They are really at war against their community's tradition on the one hand, and against the kind of modernity that is being imposed by the global economy on the other. And that's important. Because it's a yes and. And I am all about the yes and. They decide what they want from their own tradition and what they will take from modernity. And it's a high wire act. Tiring, but also exhilarating. Yes, it is a little bit exhilarating, I must admit. I just really don't like having to balance that, because I actually fucking hate it. Because in many ways, I am kind of traditional in my outlook towards my culture. Yes, there are a lot of things that I will not give up about my culture, but I will also not get off my culture's neck when it comes to harmful things. Another thing everyone probably has to deal with here is persistence of color, the emphasis on being fair-skinned. Who is the darkest skinned person in my family? I know that all too well. I was reading about Kareena Kapoor, a young Bollywood starlet who is opening, incidentally, a Pizza Hut in Gargaon, and she was described as cream-colored, a favorable designation. Oh, she responds, I'm so glad you brought this up, because most people, foreigners, don't even notice there's a color difference between white Indians and black Indians. But it's something that really drives me crazy here. India is one of the most racist modern societies. The kind of things people would say about being dark-skinned is stunningly astonishing. There was a television program a few years ago about this. In the audience, there was a Sudanese man, an albino man, and a Punjabi woman who runs a marriage bureau. I've never seen anything more ridiculous. The Sudanese man talked about how terrible it was for him to live here and how girls would cross other sides of the road, how people will pull his hair on the bus and call him, oh, I won't even repeat the word, which is roughly equivalent to the N-word. The albino man said, I don't know whether I would be considered fair or dark. So he asked the woman who runs the marriage bureau whether she could get him a bride. She looked at him and said, I can get you a polio victim. This was all being done without irony. At the end of it, the man who was presenting the show said, it looks like all of us have very color conscious. In actual fact, why do we spend so much time thinking about packaging? Black people are also nice underneath. Unironically, what the fuck? This is India. This is Indian society. And I will be the first to say Indian society is very anti-black. If you look at newspapers, you'll see advertisements for some cream called Afghan Snow or Fair and Lovely. All of these white women in Bollywood films, 90% of the women in India, are dark. But according to Bollywood, if you're not light, you're not beautiful. The rising international popularity of Bollywood films worries me. Some of them reinforce terrible and disempowering values. And that was my thesis, by the way. My thesis was on the visual representation, the visual and cultural representation of women in Bollywood. Poor people, the Dalits and Advasis, are mostly dark. There's an apartheid system at work here, for anyone who cares to notice. I was told by my family constantly, "Oh, you'd be so pretty if you were light-skinned, or if you weren't so dark." Let's go to another Bombay Bollywood star from an older generation, Nargis. She complained bitterly about Satyajit Ray, the great Indian filmmaker, saying that his films only show poverty. Then she was asked, "What would you rather see in Indian cinema?" And she said, "Dams." So she responds, "You're not showing India in a proper light. That's a great middle-class complaint. Why can't you show McDonald's and Pizza King? Because here, you see, people have learned not to see poverty. They have filters, these contact lenses that filter it out. They don't understand why outsiders get so exercised about it. They take it as a kind of affront." Then last question for the chapter. I'm interested in how that operates. I've seen it myself, and I see it in myself when I'm here in India. How do you look away from someone who's terribly poor and indigent? She says it's a survival technique. Meaning, how else are you to survive? You find a way of continuing with your life. So you just filter it out. Any questions or comments about this chapter? Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be right back on YouTube and Twitch. We are back, Twitch and YouTube. Okay, so now we get to chapter 4. It is called The Globalization of Dissent. We begin. In March 2002, a pogrom was carried out against the Muslim population of Gujarat. You've written an essay on this entitled Democracy. Who is she when she is at home? What happened in Gujarat? Answer. In February 2002, the BJP were gearing up for elections in Uttar Pradesh. Uttar Pradesh is where my family is from. They had trundled out their favorite campaign issue, the building of the Ram temple in Ayodhya. Oh, yeah. Communal tension was at a fever pitch. People were traveling to Ayodhya by train to participate in the building of the temple. At the time, Gujarat was the only major state in India to have a BJP government. It had for some time been the laboratory in which Hindu fascism had been conducting an elaborate experiment. In late February, a train carrying belligerent VHP and Bajrang Dal activists was stopped by a mob outside the Godhra station. A whole compartment of the train was set on fire, and 58 people were burnt alive. Nobody really knew who was responsible for the carnage. Within hours, a meticulously planned pogrom was unleashed against the Muslim community. About 2,000 Muslims were killed. 150,000 were driven from their homes. Women publicly gang-raped. Parents bludgeoned to death in front of their children. The leaders of the mob had computer-generated lists marking out Muslim-owned shops, homes, and businesses which were burned to the ground. Sound familiar? Muslim places of worship were desecrated. The mob was equipped with trucks loaded with thousands of gas cylinders that had been hoarded weeks in advance. The police did not merely protect the mob, but provided covering fire. Within months, Gujarat's chief minister, Narendra Modi, announced publicly that he wanted to have early elections. He believed that this would win him Hindu hearts. The pogrom itself. Modi was right, wasn't he? Modi's re-election is something that had shaken so many of us to the core of our beings. It's one thing to have a dictator who commits genocide. It's another thing to have an elected government with officials who have been accused of actively abetting mass murder being re-elected. Because then all of us must bear the shame of that. All of us must bear some responsibility. But thinking deeply about it, I don't see all that's different from the American public electing president after president who has killed and massacred and bombed people all over the world. A child asked me quite recently, is Bush better or is Modi better? And I said, why are you asking? He responded, because Modi killed his own people and Bush is killing others. That's how clear children can be. Eventually, after thinking about it, I said, well, the people they killed are all people. We have to think like that. What happened in Gujarat has raised serious questions. When you speak to somebody and tell them that 2,000 were raped and pregnant women had their stomachs slit open, normal people who are outside that situation, recoil in horror. But people inside the situation are saying things like, they deserved it. How do you deal with that? It's the same narrative. Every single time you have one group that is seeking supremacy over another, Israel, you have the same reasoning. They deserved it. It isn't a coincidence that the massacre of Muslims in Gujarat happened after September 11th. Gujarat is a place where the toxic waste of the World Trade Center is being dumped right now. That waste is literally being dumped in Gujarat and taken off to Ludhiana and other places like that to be recycled. It's quite a metaphor. The demonization of Muslims has also been given legitimacy by world's superpowers, by the emperor himself. We are at a stage where democracy, this corrupted, scandalous version of democracy, is a problem. So much of what politicians do is with an eye on elections only. Wars are fought as election campaigns. In India, Muslims are killed as part of election campaigns. In 1984, after the massacre of Sikhs in Delhi, the Congress Party won hands down. We must ask ourselves the serious questions about this particular brand of democracy. And we really must. there is a call for our president to be impeached right now. We have not, since Nelson Mandela stepped down from office at the turn of the elections, 94, in 1999. That was the end of his presidency. Since then, we have not had a single president see his entire term through. And we have to ask ourselves, what's going on behind the scenes here? What is the underlying cause for this? And there are many factors at play. We have to understand that Ghana just brought South Africa before the African Union to answer for crimes against immigrants into the country. And we also need to understand that Ghana just signed one of their biggest security deals with Israel. Not even a week later, Ghana takes South Africa to the African Union. It's all interlinked. And there's no easy answer. Because the xenophobic attacks that are going on in South Africa right now need to be answered for, absolutely. But why is a country that is aligning itself with the Zionist state bringing South Africa before the African Union only a week after signing the security deals? It's all interlinked. What was the response of the political class in India and the media to Modi being re-elected? The media in India can be roughly divided into the national English media and the local regional language newspapers. Typically, their understandings of similar events are completely different. The local Gujarati press was vehemently anti-Muslim. It manipulated events and supported what was happening. But the English press was outspoken and condemnatory of what Modi was doing in Gujarat. It's important to understand that the killing in Gujarat and the long run-up, the climate was created soon after the BJP came into power and India conducted nuclear tests, with the help of Israel, by the way. This whole business of unfettered Hindu nationalism, where else was it going to lead? The national press supported the idea from the beginning. It supported the Kargil war uncritically. The English language press in India supports the project of corporate globalization fully. It has no time for dispossession and drought and farmers' deaths and the ravages of the corporate globalization project that is being wreaked on the poor of India. So to suddenly turn around and condemn the riots is typical middle-class response. Let's support everything that leads to the conditions in which the massacres take place, but when the killing starts, you recoil in middle-class horror and say, oh, that's not very nice, can't we be more civilized? Yeah, that's exactly it. It's liberal nonsense. Once Modi won the elections, the English language press began to whip itself and say, we got it wrong. Maybe the secularists are taking too much of an anti-Hindu position and rubbish like that. They began to negotiate with the fascists, basically. The Chamber of Indian Industry apologized to Modi for having said things about the fact that the genocide was bad for business. They promised to reinvest in Gujarat. So as soon as he won, everybody was busy negotiating and retracting. I lost track of the number of references I've seen in the media to Modi magic. Ugh. What was the response of the so-called intellectual class, academics and writers to Gujarat in Modi's re-election? I think everybody felt whipped and beaten because Modi was gloating. Everybody felt as if they had taken a pounding, which they had to an extent. I think it threw the opposition, I don't mean Congress when I say the opposition, but the critics in this kind of politics, into disarray. Because they felt that, and they were made to feel that, they had no place in modern India. These voices of sanity and reason felt like they had no place. Academics have this problem. If you are an economist, you're only an economist. If you are a sociologist, you're only a sociologist. If you are a historian, you're only a historian. And now to understand what's going on, you must cross disciplines. And you must see the connections between dispossession and the despair created by corporate globalization, flowing into bitterness of partition, flowing into the rhetoric of cultural nationalism. All of these things come together to create the situation. And that's part of the reason I asked that question in our general chat. I asked, question for everyone. We always talk about the underlying conditions of individualism, capitalism, and empire. But I'm thinking, how can we create the underlying conditions for empathy and community? And it's so easy to say, hey, let's just choppy. But as I said at the beginning, going straight into what will be a revolution will still harm mostly the most marginalized and the most at risk. The most vulnerable in society will be harmed. So, as all of these factors lead up to a situation where a right-wing fascist, that's an oxymoron, a fascist will be elected as prime minister, what can come together to enable a society rooted in care, a society rooted in community? So he asks, Gujarat is also, ironically, the home state of Mahatma Gandhi. I refuse to call him Mahatma anymore because Mahatma is a term that is reserved for people I have respect for. He is not a Mahatma. He is Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. His first name is Mohandas. Let's call him by his name instead of exalting him to Mahatma. In 1930, there was an interesting event there. He led a salt march to the coastal town of Dandi. Why don't you recount that so people have another kind of historical perspective? Also, he led a salt march in my home city. Whatever critique one may or may not have of him, Gandhi's understanding of politics and public imagination is unsurpassed. I would say by any politician in world history. He knew how to strike at the heart of empire. The Salt March, the Dandi March, when Indians marched to the sea to make salt. It was a strike against the salt tax. It wasn't just a symbolic weekend march, but struck at the heart of the economic policies of the colonial regime. And this is part of the same reason that we had the Salt March here, because Indian people were not allowed to buy salt commercially, and there was a high tax on salt that was bought in trade for Indian people. What has happened to the evolution of nonviolent resistance is that what has become more and more is symbolic and less real. When a symbol unmoors itself from what it symbolizes, it loses meaning and becomes ineffective. And that is why I keep on saying that No Kings was not a protest, No Kings was a demonstration. Was the country calling? Were the people marching against Trump calling for his resignation? Were they calling for his impeachment? Was there something tangible that the protests were aiming to do? 15 million people marched against the war on Iraq in February 15, 2003, in perhaps the biggest display of public morality. It was fantastic, but it was symbolic. Governments of today have learned to deal with that. They know how to wait out a demonstration or a march. They know that the day after tomorrow, opinions can change or be manipulated into changing. Unless civil disobedience becomes real, not symbolic, there is little hope for change. Aww. That's an important lesson that we need to learn from the civil disobedience and nonviolent resistance of the Indian independence struggle. It was always a real strike against the economics of imperialism. What was Swadeshi about? It was saying, don't buy British products. It was saying, make your own yarn, make your own salt. We have to take apart the economic machinery of empire and strike at it. These marches and songs and meetings of today, they're beautiful, but they're often mostly for us. If all of our energies go into organizing, we don't do any real damage to the establishment or empire. And before I get into the next question, we have to understand that empire is the way it is for a reason. Empire is the way it is because it has continued unfettered, as we've said, at every turn. Okay, this tax is increasing. Oh well. Oh, this law is coming into place. Oh well. We have done nothing to curb the onslaught of imperial economic policy that has resulted in where we are now. Any questions? Okay, that's going to drive me nuts until I clip it off. Okay, he asks, there's a lot of talk in the US about empire. A book by British historian Niall Ferguson, Empire, celebrates the positive aspects of imperialism, particularly British rule. The jewel in the crown of Britain, of course, was colonial India. She says it's rather staggering that people like Ferguson are touting the benefits of imperialism. By the middle of the 18th century, just about the time that the British took over, India accounted for nearly 25% of the world's global trade. When the British left in 1947, this figure dwindled to around 4 to 5%. Much scholarly research has demonstrated that during British rule, India's economy underwent a process of peasantization, where urban areas were ruralized, essentially. Recently, traveling to the West, it's the first time it even occurred to me that people can justify imperialism. Let me say categorically, politically, socially, economically, there is no justification for colonialism. Next, these people will be justifying genocide or slavery. They do. They do. Weren't they the foundations of American empire? Do you think that the people of South Africa or anywhere on the continent of Africa or India or Pakistan are longing to be kicked around all over again? Oh, the white people want apartheid back. We know that. The white people of South Africa, they definitely want apartheid back. Is Ferguson aware of how many million people died in India in the late 19th century because of the drought and famine, while food and raw materials were being exported to England? How dare they even talk like this? It's grotesque that anybody can sit down and write a reasoned book on something like this. It is nothing short of grotesque. Thomas Friedman, the Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for the New York Times, has written that America is in an imperial role here, now. Security and standing in the world ride on getting Iraq right. Ugh. Well, it isn't doing that, isn't it? But the point is that the justification for going to war against Iraq has been forgotten. The weapons of mass destruction have not been found. You were told in the US that Iraq was going to annihilate you, just as Cuba was, just as Nicaragua was, just as El Salvador was, and all the tiny little countries of the world were. After the war, you were told America was going to be secure. But today, after the war, the terrorist alerts keep being set to purple or whatever is the highest register is. And now you're saying Al-Qaeda is in Iran, or maybe in Syria, or maybe in North Korea. The point is that any kind of justification, any kind of nonsense works because there isn't any real media left in the US. It's just this kind of propaganda machine that spews out whatever suits the occasion and banks on people's short memory span. She's right. She's just 100% correct. When you spoke at the World Social Forum in Porto Alegre in Brazil in late January 2003, you said that you were certain that the United States was going to attack Iraq. In fact, you said, it's more than clear that Bush is determined to go to war against Iraq regardless of facts and regardless of international public opinion. I remember that. I was in my second year of university. Hi, Omar. I remember that so clearly. I don't think you needed to be a genius to be certain. There's a strategy at work which has nothing to do with the propaganda that's being put out. And when you start to see the pattern, you have a sense of what's going to happen. Thank you. After the attack on Afghanistan, you started to see the preparations for the next war, the one against Iraq. And now you are laying the basis for even more. I find it shocking that people should think that the world public opinion should have changed because the United States, quote unquote, won the war. Did anybody think that it wasn't going to? Here's a country that is so ruthless in what it's prepared to do that it's going to win every war that it fights, except if its own people do something about it. There isn't any country that can fight a conventional war against US forces and win. This is true. Talk about war is viewed as a product to be marketed, sold to the consumers, in this case, the American public. Yep. Absolutely, 100%. Referring to the timing of the Iraq War, a Bush administration spokesperson said, from a marketing point of view, you don't introduce new products in August. They were asking themselves, what's the best season to introduce this new product? When do you start the campaign? Thank you. When should you actually launch it? Today, the crossover between Hollywood and the US military is getting more and more promiscuous. War is also an economic necessity. A significant section of the US economy depends on the sales of weapons. There has to be a turnover. You can't have cruise missiles lying around on the factory floor. The economies of Europe and the US depend on the sale and manufacture of these weapons. This is a huge imperative to go to war. Apart from this, the US needs millions of barrels of oil a day to keep its bloated economy chugging along. It needs Iraq. It needs Venezuela. What accounts for the brazenness of the Bush administration? For example, Paul Wolfowitz, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, was talking about Syria, saying it was behaving badly, like the headmaster wagging his finger at a bad student. How is this attitude seen outside the US? I think two ways. On one hand, it's seen as a kind of uncouth stupidity. On the other, it's seen as the insulting language of power. You speak like this because you can. And that is where I'm going to stop for today, because my throat is getting sore. I know it was under an hour of reading, but yeah, I need to focus. my students have their assignments due in 2 minutes, and as soon as they're handed in, I need to write. I need to grade their papers. So, yeah. Any questions? Okay, so to YouTube and Twitch, I'm going to say good night now, and I shall see y'all next week. As for TikTok, I shall say good night to you in a minute. Bye bye.